know we could have we all have more questions, and but thank you so much for that enlightening discussion, conversation. We are going to continue with a conversation about planning for change, adaptation, coastal resilience and adaptation. And I'd like to invite Dina Moran, Julia Neisel, and Neil Duffy to the stage to take a chair. Dina Moran is the Chief Coastal Resilience Officer for the Office of, come on up, yeah, for Coastal Zone Management. Julia Neisel is the Coastal Shoreline and Floodplain Manager with the Office of Coastal Zone Management. And Neil Duffy is the Director of Sustainability and Resiliency with the City of Salem. And again, I'm Barbara Warren with Salem's on Coast Watch. All of the conference speakers' bios are on PEM's conference website or webpage, pem.org/events, and you just type in preservation, it'll come right up if you want to learn more about each person today. The four of us are working with communities to plan for the changes that are being driven by the climate crisis. While we work at different scales, we have shared missions and goals, and that is why we have been able to form such strong partnerships. The people here work together, and you'll hear about that this morning. Dina and Julia focus on the 78 coastal communities in their roles with the state coastal zone management. I lead a regional environmental nonprofit that works across the North Shore with municipalities, other nonprofits like the House of Seven Gables and Mass Audubon. We work with businesses and residents. While Neil is the Director of Sustainability and Resiliency, he works with city projects. In our discussion today, we hope to explore the ideas of collective and individual responsibility and the importance of being proactive. The scale of the problem can be overwhelming. Public resources are not unlimited, but if we wait until there's an emergency, we are limited in the ways we can respond and recover. We need to understand the risks, how the available resources, what the available resources are, set priorities, as Chief Hoffer said, decide what is possible and what may be beyond our current reach. Many of us here today live and work in historic communities. Almost every coastal community has areas that were built on coastal floodplains, coastal wetlands, filled salt marshes, buried rivers. We've got those in Peabody and Salem. These are areas that are already experienced the impact of sea level rise in increased storms, more extreme wind, waves, and precipitation. So Dina will start us off with an overview of the state's approach in its new initiative, Resilient Coast. Thank you, Dina.
Good morning, everyone. I have the terrible misfortune of following Chief Hoffer, so I'll try and follow up on that. As Barbara said, my name is Deanna. I, as of June, am the new Chief Coastal Resilience Officer at the Office of Coastal Zone Management, and I am leading the Resilient Coast Initiative, which is a brand new initiative launched, as Chief Hoffer said, last November. It's a collaborative project being led by CZM and the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And we are really pursuing this initiative following on both the recommendations coming off of Chief Hoffer's report last year and also our Resilient Mass Plan, which is our statewide climate adaptation and hazard mitigation plan that we update every so often. And the recommendation really was, as Chief Hoffer said, we need a overarching, comprehensive, coast-wide view of coastal resilience in the state. We have so many communities, including Salem, doing such fantastic work at a community, granular, site-by-site level. And the state has been supporting those efforts for really the last decade through a number of different grant programs, including CZM's Coastal Resilience Grant Program, as well as our EEA, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which I know Salem participates in. And that work is so instrumental both to how we've gotten here and the work that we still need to do. And so in recognizing that resilience is so local, there are always going to be unique challenges that every community faces. And we don't want to supplant that work. That work needs to continue. The state is going to continue to support our coastal communities in doing that granular planning. We're trying to come in and add some value. And where we think we can be valuable is providing a statewide lens on what we need to be doing and where, and how we need to be prioritizing resources. As Chief Hoffer said, we're looking at a really big bill for resilience. We have a lot to do. We've lost a lot of time, and we have to figure out how we can move quickly towards implementation. We spent a really long time, many years, planning for resilience, and that work will pay off because we have so much data and so much information now that really will lend itself to this implementation phase. And I want to point out that Massachusetts has, no surprise, some of the greatest minds working on this, which means we have some of the greatest data to help us in this effort. The Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model is so unique and so helpful to all of the planning that we're doing around climate. We have really granular data to tell us, based on different projections and different scenarios, what flood risk will look like, not just from coastal storms, but also from nuisance flooding, high tide flooding on sunny days. That is the information that we're really leaning on for our Resilient Coast initiative. And we're looking out to 2070 because that really is the time frame that we need to be planning for. We don't want to be putting a plan together for 2030, which is almost just a short 5 years away, and then have to redo it again. We want to be doing that long-term planning and making some of those long-term investment and decisions about where we build, where we invest, and how we're going to tackle the flood issue all along the Massachusetts coast. And so when you look at 2070, it's interesting because if any of you are familiar with CZM's Coastal Zone program, we have 78 coastal communities that are in the coastal zone right now. And those communities like Salem, have dealt with flooding and other coastal issues for a very long time. When we look out to 2070, we actually have 20 additional communities that get brought into the coastal zone, primarily from flooding up tidal rivers. And we are planning now for that geographic region. So it's 98 communities on our coast that need to be working together collectively, brainstorming, sharing in thought leadership and best practices of how we tackle this, not on a community by community basis, but regionally. And that's really where Resilient Coasts come in. So the cornerstone of this plan that we're working on is our coastal resilience districts. And so we are developing a set of coastal resilience districts that really are intended to identify the geographic scale at which we want coastal communities to be working together on climate resilience. And the way that we're defining those areas is by looking at places that have really shared systems and infrastructure and risk. Where are the places that have shared flood pathways, where water is not respecting a municipal boundary and they really could be working together cross-jurisdictionally on a solution? Where are the places that have really similar underlying coastal environments? We have rocky banks, we have barrier beaches with salt marsh. All of those different types of places require a different resilience solution. It's never going to be a one-size-fits-all. But at the same time, we have a lot of those places repeating all up and down the coast. So how can we, at the same time that we're trying to encourage and facilitate regional collaboration on resilience, identify best practices that are applicable coastwide? How can we be facilitating that peer learning and that sharing of information? And then most importantly, how can the state be signaling where we think some strategies are more or less suitable? We want to be able to create some consistency around how we're approaching coastal resilience all up and down the Massachusetts coastline. We want to be able to provide some transparency around how the state thinks we should be addressing coastal resilience and where we should be investing and in what. So that is really what we're hoping to achieve through this initiative. As Chief Hoffer said, we've had a number of opportunities for stakeholder engagement leading up to this point. We are gearing up to come back out this fall and do a lot more stakeholder engagement, including an upcoming set of public meetings that we're hoping to hold in October. So keep an eye on the CZM website for the registration link for those meetings. One of the things that we're going to be doing in October is releasing a draft of our coastal resilience districts that we're proposing. And those really are a draft. We, are looking forward to the feedback that we get from, all stakeholders, including the municipalities who, this is intended to be useful for. So we want to hear from you all about whether this makes sense, what else we should be thinking about. And we also want to hear from all of our coastal communities about what they think the challenges and opportunities are in their community, but also in these regional districts that we're trying to facilitate regional action within. So I will stop there. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it to Julia.
Thanks, Deanna. So I'm Julia Neisel. I manage the shoreline and floodplain team at CZM. So we work together on managing risk and trying to implement proactive strategies on the ground. Deanna covered resilient coast, but I'm going to put a finer point on some of the data that we're using to inform those planning decisions. So traditionally, CZM has put out shoreline change information. What has our shoreline been doing over the last 150 years, and more recently over the last 30 years? What has that short-term trend been looking like, and how has that been influenced by human alterations? We also have flood risk information, coastal bank erosion, and all of these data sources have been applied by extrapolating the historic trends over the future, and that's not adequate anymore. We can't just look at the past as an indicator of the future, as we've talked about this morning. So we're working with colleagues at the U.S. Geological Survey and other federal agencies, as well as consultants, to think differently about how that analysis is done and how we can put forward more useful information in order to design projects that have a lifespan over the next 30, 50, 100 years. When we look at risk and how that interacts with infrastructure that we have in our communities, whether it's roads, bridges, or seawalls, we also need an accurate understanding of their condition and how they can be retrofitted. In our Resilient Mass Plan, we put in a priority strategy to look at best practices for redeveloping and redesigning that infrastructure. And we're looking forward to working with technical partners and engineers on those projects over the next few years. The one piece that I think you might be interested in is that we haven't really put forward the exposure of cultural resources to erosion and flooding. And thanks to our Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources, which is hosted at CZM, we were able to get some NOAA funding to work with the Mass Historical Commission and bring forward the cultural resource information that we have for the state and look at it in terms of our future flood risk with the MCFRM information that Deanna mentioned, but also what is our future change likelihood going to be. So since BUAR is hosting the project, we're looking at shipwrecks and how coastal storms are going to expose those shipwrecks and potentially destroy them before they're adequately inventoried or described, recorded. We're also looking at historic fish weirs and where they're located across the coast and what erosion and storm damages might look like to those resources. And then we're also taking it onto land and seeing where we have our historic neighborhoods, those homes that were built when sea level was a foot lower or more, and putting a spotlight on that issue. We're also bringing in the tribal communities finally in this cultural resource project and looking at where we have native cultural sites. I know, it's about time. Thank you. Yeah, so this year, hopefully by the end of this year, our BOAR will be able to put forward some maps that show where we have these high concentrations of cultural resources along the coast and where we need to be prioritizing restoration projects of the shoreline in order to stabilize those areas, or potentially where archaeologists need to focus their attention to get out and describe these places and try and educate the public about the value of these cultural resources. So we're very excited about this project, and I'll also just give a little teaser for the next panel. we have our Coastal Resilience Grant Program at CZM, which has been supporting community work over the last 10 years. And we are very happy to be able to use that grant program to bring forward all the best technical information to community projects and to work proactively and have discussions with the broader community about where we can start to relocate buildings and infrastructure and reduce our exposure to risk. So I'll wrap it there and pass it. Okay.
Thank you, Julia and Deanna. So Salem Sound Coast Watch is a regional nonprofit, as I said, and we have our eyes on the coast. So, and our supporters and the people who live here will report to us as things change. So we're looking at the coastline and the rivers and the biodiversity and the salt marshes. We have found that knowing the region's environmental and geological history is incredibly important in understanding what's happening today and helps us to determine appropriate actions. So I'm going to talk about two examples. The first one is the Collins Cove Living Shoreline here in Salem. So one section of the cove was filled for railroad tracks back in the mid-1800s. The tracks were removed in 1970, but the gravel remained. And it will stay there because underneath the railroad tracks, the Peabody Main sewer line is buried over to SESD, the wastewater treatment plant. However, salt marsh plants were still trying to grow there. And we saw that, even though the salt marsh was there before it was filled. So we brought this to the city's attention and helped them apply for a CZM Coastal Resiliency Grant, which culminated in 2019 with the construction of Salem's first living shoreline, a salt marsh. So we recreated a salt marsh there, using some of the plants that were there and bringing in new ones, bringing in sand. Neither the city nor Salem Sound Coast Watch could have done this alone. Partnership with nonprofits, municipalities, the state are crucial for making real change. So a living shoreline is a nature-based solution. It dampens the wave velocity. It is absorbent, being plants and salt marsh. In this urban environment, we also found that it adds green space. The gravel was terrible. You know, it was sort of referred to as a beach, but it really, nobody would go there as a beach. It has more nature, and it reduces the heat effect. Now you've got grasses growing. But also what I found that I sort of hadn't thought about, it's on a very busy pathway, multi-use path, that I meet people from Beverly, Peabody, all over Salem use this pathway. And I've had so many conversations about salt marshes. How come the plants die? So sorry, Barbara, they're all dead. And no, this is just part of the natural cycle. They'll be green again. So, you know, many of us living in an urban area don't go to the Great Marsh. You don't get out, or you do, and you're sort of afraid to go in it because, you know, you don't go into wetlands. So it's been a really good educational opportunity to share what a salt marsh and wetlands can do for our community. The next one I wanted to talk about is the Winter Island Pathway and Bank Erosion Project. Again, we've seen the Winter Island Park, we've seen the Coastal Bank. Many of us use it on a weekly, almost a daily basis. It's a beautiful place. But it is exactly what Julia was talking about. It's a pre-contact site. There's an earthen fort there that was built in 1643, Fort Pickering. So those exist there, but it's very heavily used. And people sort of feel like, oh, I'm at Winter Island Park, I can go anywhere, everywhere. So we have a lot of social or desired paths. So combined with this overuse in some places, it's covered with invasive species that have shallow roots that don't help with erosion. And we have a changing climate. our coastal baths are eroding, and the bank has accelerated. When you look at the old shoreline erosion maps, it says this Winter Island is fine. It's not going to erode. But last winter, our storms are changing, and we're getting, we usually get the nor'easters. And last winter, several storms started in the south, moved over to the east, then to the north, northeast, and north. And so it sort of hit all our coastal banks in all different directions. And we lost over 4 feet of the coastal bank. And some of the paths have been closed, and they will be permanently closed. So we are working together, hoping to come up with establish and implement coastal bank best practices that preserve the archaeological and historical resource. And then we hope that that will be able to be shared with the communities on our coast. Human use is a huge factor, both a problem and part of the solution. We have to involve the people who use the area. And again, no one organization, agency, or city can succeed alone.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm Neil Duffy. I am the Director of Sustainability and Resiliency for the City of Salem. As Barbara mentioned, our department works on city projects and also community-wide on both resiliency and mitigation projects. I've been with Salem for about a year and a half. The climate action, resilience, adaptation planning that's been happening in Salem predates my arrival by at least 10 years. A lot of that master planning and planning work has been work that's been supported by agencies like CZM and other state agencies, and has been done in collaboration with organizations like Salem Sound Coast Watch, or in some cases led by organizations like Salem Sound Coast Watch. So I certainly echo everything that's been said, even from the mayor's welcoming remarks about collective action, collective responsibility, and collaboration being such an important part of all this work. So I describe most of this as up until recently as a lot of identifying of priorities and identifying of next actions to take, different priorities in the city and different areas that we should focus on. And we are at the place now where we're doing some of the more, what Deanna had mentioned as like granular work in certain locations. That master planning strategic work is an ongoing process, I think, and the Resilience Coasts initiative will certainly help with that. I think Salem will continue to develop our overall approach as a city, which I don't think we certainly have defined definitively yet, but in the meantime, we are still working in specific areas throughout the city. One project that I thought I'd share with you today is work that we're doing in the Point El Punto neighborhood in the city. If you're not from Salem, the Point El Punto is a stone's throw from here. It's I was looking at the historic map up there. It's like right where it says Salem, like right above that. But it's right near downtown. It is a vibrant and diverse community, historically where immigrant community has settled for over a century. It is probably one of the most vulnerable places in the city, both physically and socially, vulnerability there. It's right on the coast, so it experiences flooding currently. It is about 3 times more densely populated than the rest of the city. So the built environment and the lack of green space certainly causes it to be an area of the city that experiences extreme heat. And the population is more than half of the people are Latine descent, most of them from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. All of the census tracts in the Point neighborhood meet the EEA's definition of environmental justice communities, both for minority and income. One of the census tracts also meets the criteria for language isolation. So it is an area that has been a focus for the city at the time when we adopted our climate action plan, our joint climate action plan with the city of Beverly in 2021 called Resilient Together. Very quickly, one of the first initiatives that came out of that is Resilient Together, the Point al Punto, with the support of CZM. We've received 2 grants from CZM for this work over the last 3 years, of which I came on board about midstream. So it started with a lot of planning on identifying the vulnerabilities that were there physically, but also I would say at least half of the work that started there and that we continue to do there has to do with engaging with the community there and having them help us develop the resources that they need to become more resilient. That work continues. I'm happy to say that for the next 2 years, we just were awarded an MVP grant, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, to continue this outreach and engagement work with the community. We also, with our past CZM grant, part of that work was to develop flood mitigation alternatives in that neighborhood, specifically in the Palmer Cove Park area. And so we have a 75% design for a potential flood barrier, which includes a berm in Palmer Cove Park and then also an elevation of the existing seawall there. We will be pursuing other resources to advance that project as we go. In terms of the community work, that started with creating community groups and having them identify the resources that they think they need to be more resilient. And also we have a community group, research group, who have identified research questions that they want to explore related to the impacts of climate change and some of the vulnerabilities in their neighborhoods. So we're going to continue to do that work over the coming 2 years, and I think that's all I have to say about that project.
Thank you, Neil. So we have about 10 minutes left. Time goes very fast when you're up here. And so we're going to ask Deanna to start with one question, but be thinking about your questions, and we'll try to keep our questions short and our answers fairly short. But go ahead, Deanna.
Sure. So I think it's great that you all have given examples of work that's really happening on the ground. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about how you approach community engagement, knowing that engagement is so critical to the success of these projects.
So I'll start off. It is really important to have everyone's support. You don't want to go through a project and come up with a solution and everybody looks at it and says, no way do I want that, and then they start fighting you. So it's really important from the very start to engage the community. That's gotten harder to do after COVID. Zoom is great, but we all have Zoom fatigue, and I think people also have planning fatigue. So when you ask somebody to come to a meeting, they go, oh, again? And we're always looking for those people who aren't keyed in, that don't know what's happening. And so what Salem's on Coast Watch has done is we do walk and talks. So we go to the neighborhood, we meet at the park, we meet at the playground, at the beach, and we ask people to come in, or we bring in the history. That always brings in different people. So we say, oh, we're gonna do a history talk, or we're gonna do a environmental, a marine talk, and then people will come and then they learn. The state wants to be us all to be very inclusive. And so one of our last projects, we did it over at Lee Fort Terrace. And we actually went to Lee Fort Terrace, which is Salem Housing, and met with the people on a Sunday morning, had breakfast there. and shared the result or what we were talking about. And they had no idea that this was going on in Salem, and they were very appreciative to be included. So I think it's really important for us all to make that effort.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Barbara said about trying to, there's a sort of a traditional framework of like having a community meeting, getting feedback, advancing your project. I think that model is challenging for both the city and for members of the community. So we do try to have those more personal interactions, and I think we're trying to move in that direction with our engagement when we do have community meetings. Certainly with this project in El Punto, we make sure we have simultaneous translation, certainly providing food and childcare when we can. I think that, over the last, we still have trouble having people come to those meetings, but when we have had folks attend, even if there's one person who uses that simultaneous translation, it's just a different experience for them and a different meeting. So we're hopeful that experience we can continue to do that. I would say in the work that we're doing in the point, to your question, the interesting part about it is there is a project that's involved, but then again, like more than half of it really is community engagement. Like that is the project, and so that is a different type of work, certainly for me, and I think for our department, where there is no sort of end, there is no ribbon cutting. This is a continuous level of engagement as we develop resources and strengthen both the community, but also the city's relationship with that community.
I'd like to add that in addition to engaging the community on specific projects and the design of those projects, as well as the implementation, monitoring, and stewardship of them, we also engage community members on citizen science. So it goes beyond just a specific project and more about getting people connected with the environment and relaying information back to inform management subsequent to that. So we have an app called the My Coast app. You all are free to download it on your iPhones or Android devices and give us some information when you're out in the community and you are experiencing higher than normal tides around those cherished places. And also, after a storm, where are we seeing erosion of our natural systems, our beaches, our dunes, coastal banks, and where are we seeing impacts on our seawalls, roads, and buildings? That information directly feeds back real time during a storm to the State Emergency Operations Center, but also after the storm, it informs future management decisions. So there's many different ways to engage the broader community in resilience work.
Do we have a question? And as they're getting the mic, as they're bringing down the mic, we now you know who we are. We're going to have a break shortly, and please feel free to come up and ask your questions. But please go ahead.
Yeah, so I work in the town of Rockport, out of the town administrator's office, but on grants and special projects, which is as broad as it sounds. But we have a few coastal issues going on, obviously. And beyond working with CZM and with EEA and the MVP program, we've had relative success with FEMA through the BRIC program as well. And I didn't know if specifically CZM, but then the other panelists as well, if you had, if there were ongoing conversations with FEMA and MEMA to sort of align the objectives of some other programs that exist at the state level with that which exists at the federal level.
We have a long history of having liaisons with our federal agencies and programs. So as you pointed out, our Mass Emergency Management Agency is the agency that administers FEMA's grant programs within the state. And CZM is a networked agency, so we have direct relationships with other agencies that work on these issues at the state. And we are absolutely involved in the review of applications, providing technical assistance and feedback on how to strengthen them, but also directly providing feedback back to FEMA on changing priorities and needs at the state.
Another question?
My name is Jackie, and I work for the House of Seven Gables and citizen here in Salem. And I like that you have got people engaged, especially in like the Point program, Collins Cove. We've been involved in a lot of this. And one of the questions that I have, or maybe comments, is we saw the engagement part. We got to those programs. We went and we wrote our feedback, but we haven't seen what's come out of it. And I know, for instance, especially at the Point, for the Point connection, my daughter wrote like a whole book as she was sitting there, but we were looking for where is what came out of it. And maybe getting those results out will get more engagement, because if you put it into the void and then you never hear anything back, you're gonna have a hard time getting that connection again.
So I'm going to give this to Neil in a minute, but I agree with you. I see that all the time, that we do citizen science, we, collect data for someone and then we never hear back. But I would say that Salem has the Salem public input page. And what we've been trying to do with the projects I've worked with, and I'm sure Neil's going to say this, is to keep those sites updated. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I would just, thank you for that feedback. We definitely, if you go to the public input site for the Point project in the final report from the last grant, that's part of what actually we wrote about in the report is our lack of sort of follow-up with the community was something that we need to work on. So I think we are working on that. I would say with that particular project, in terms of the community engagement piece, I would say a lot of what we did over the last year was actually just, for lack of a better word, it was more internal, where we are trying to build relationships with members of the community. And so we actually are still developing what those projects will be. And so that in some cases there is not a lot to report on other than that. So that's part of the reason why there's been a lack of information on that side of it. But thank you for the feedback, and I don't disagree with it.
While we're going for one more question, I'll just add that Salem Town Coast Watch has a lecture series over at the Abbott Library in Marblehead in January through July. It's recorded, it's on Zoom, and you can do it in person, so all three options. And every year, so the last 3 or 4 years now, I do a talk on the coastal resilience in our community. So I will give an update and any coastal resiliency project I know is going on from Manchester, Beverly, Salem, Peabody, and Marblehead. So just to tune in there too. I try to go and reach out and find out where they're at and report that if I don't know. Okay, it's time? Okay, so no more questions. But we're here, and enjoy coffee in the break, and please talk with us.
Okay, I would like to thank our speakers, moderator Barbara Warren, Dina Moran, Julia Neisel, and Neil Duffy. So we have a 20-minute break. Very important for everyone to be back in their seats by 11:05 so that we are ready to launch session 2, which is a climate-based case study focused on the House of Seven Gables. So see you at 11:05.